One day we're playing and I hear him say, "It's time for you to go in the back room." Go in the back room, okay? Go in the back room. When I go in the back room, my brother and my sister are there. And my stepfather's famous line was, "If I do one of you, I do all of you." And my brother, I'll never forget the look on his face. The look on his face was devastation. And my brother said, "No, no, 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 no. Whatever you're doing to her, do me." And so my brother says, "Sharon, whatever you do, don't come down the hall." And I promised him, but of course I lied. And to my dismay, when I went down the hall and peeked through the door with the crystal handle, this man was violating my brother. I can recall all the way back to when I was about 2.5 that there was something that was going on in my home that was not appropriate. And I say 2.5 because I can remember that I was still wearing diapers when my stepfather started engaging me with. My mom would leave for work about 6 o'clock, and my older siblings were in school. So from Monday through Friday, I was left with my stepfather alone in the apartment. And what would happen was, as soon as he assured the fact that my mother and my siblings were gone, he would get in the middle of the bed and take off all of his clothes. And he had burns on his chest. And so being a young person, a child, a baby even, I was curious and would touch his chest and he would say, "Oh, it's okay. It feels good. Continue to touch my chest." And then he would take my hands and he would move my hand slowly down his torso to his midsection. He would take my hand, my small hands, and put it on his, and then he would move his up and, massaging it up and down until he reached. And then my response would be, "Well, what is that?" And he would say, "Taste it." And we would go in the shower and we would take a shower together every day. This was normal. This was my routine every single day. And again, this went on for a very, very long time. Our sexual abuse, or my specific sexual abuse, went on from 2.5 until 9 years old. My stepfather was forcing himself inside of me, a little girl. And so as a young person, I had arthritis because my hands would swell from him every day. And I would tell my mother, and her response to that was to pour green alcohol and Bengay on my hands, rub my hands, and she would wrap them in ace bandages at night. But never once did she decide to leave this man, and she stayed with them. They were married for 55 years. I remember around the time I was 8 or 9, and I started having bad stomach pain. I remember me and my sister was outside playing horsey, and one day all of a sudden my stomach just started hurting tremendously. I was just bent over, doubled over in pain. And so they took me to the hospital because the pain would not stop. And when they examined me, I had a tubal infection. And the doctor said, a fallopian tubal infection. And they said the only way that she could have had this type of infection is that she's having sex. So my mother looks at me very sternly and say, "You better not say anything." It was the early 1970s. I'm just another little black girl, another little brown girl. And so they did not do their duty. They did not report this violation. And I would sit back home. So I've been picked on all of my life. After school at 2:35, me and would walk across to the grass and the kids would say, "We're going to beat up Cheryl Jones." And it got so frequent that I would just go lay in the grass and they would jump on top of me and beat me up and slap me around. Then one day this girl, she had just moved from the Bronx and she came to our school and it said, "Oh, beat up Cheryl. She's the girl to beat. She's easy to beat. She won't fight back." And so that's what I did. And of course I went in my spot where I laid down in the grass. She jumped on me. And my brother had been hearing about me getting beat up on a regular basis. And he said to me, "Sharon, you gotta fight." So I had 3 names. I had Sharon, Cheryl, and now I'm Beloved. Cheryl was my birth name. Sharon was my nickname. And Beloved is the woman that I became on August the 10th 2021, I went and changed my name legally because I never felt beloved. I never felt cherished or adored or treasured or any of those things. And I knew that every time that name would go out into the atmosphere, I was changing my destiny. So that day, after my got off of me, I heard my brother's voice in my ear. You got to fight back. And so as she began to walk into Bowman Towers, I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, listen, my brother said, if I don't beat you up, he's going to beat me up. And needless to say, I put a whooping on her that day. Honey, I scratched and punched and scratched and punched and jumped on top of her. And it was taking all of my energy to fight back like this. I was like, I was dealing with violence in my home. I didn't want to be violent toward anyone else. And then she had a little scratches and a little bit of blood. And then her mom called my mom. And I got a whooping for defending myself that day. So it was like almost in vain. Another thing that was very interesting is that my mother was a cleaning fanatic. And so I remember one Saturday, we're cleaning the apartment. And I think one of them said something about their menstrual cycle. And I said, I know where that comes from. You know, a girl bleeds out of her behind. And my mother said, what did you say? And I said, I know why mama's always mad. She's mad because she thinks her husband is having with you. And my mother said, what did you say? And this look of rage, I mean, like she transformed into a whole different human being. And she began to chase me around the apartment. We had bunk beds. And she got a belt and I jumped atop of the bed and I slid down the back and I ran past her. And as I'm running, my sister that's closest to me, for some reason, and she said, oh, she ran into the shower. She's in there. And I remember I ran in there and I was now cornered in the shower. And my mother grabbed me and body slammed me in the shower. And she jumps on top of me. She is choking the life out of me. The veins are bulging in her neck. And the veins are bulging in my neck. And there's whelps all over me. And she's scratching me. And she's beating me with a broomstick. And she had with one hand. And she is choking me. And her full body weight is on top of my chest. And as my mother is choking me with one hand, she reaches up and grabs a hammer. All steel from handle to top. And as she jumping and grabbing and coming down to hit me on the head, my oldest sister jumps on her back and says, you're going to kill her. And she says, that's my intention. I'm going to kill this today. And then my mother and my sister are tussling and they're rolling and things are knocking and breaking. And I have just enough room to get up from under my mother's clutch. And I am breathing and heavily and I'm bleeding and my clothes are torn and I'm tattered. And by now we have an audience to the back door of our apartment. You know, people are coming and trying to figure out what in the world is going on. And my mother and my sister is tussling and we had a neighbor. Her name was Miss, and she screams at my mother, what in the world is wrong? You're gonna kill your child over a... And so she grabs me and pulls me out from the midst. And by that time, the police have arrived. And you know, they're looking at my mother. My mother is slobbering from the mouth. I mean, just like a wild animal. When we moved across town, across the city to the other, into a very nice neighborhood, to a nice, decent neighborhood, I remember being afraid because I remember that now my eldest sister wasn't going to be there, and who was going to be there to protect me. So I'm sitting there at the edge of the bed, and like clockwork, my stepfather comes in and he grabs my breast. And I jump up and I run into the kitchen and I said, he touched my breast. And my mother says immediately, I'm so sick of it. And she says, so she calls him, come here. And he comes in and she says, Sharon says that you touched her breast. I don't give a good what she says. She says, and then they go in the bedroom and come back out, and my mother goes back to cooking. And I'm standing there in the hallway like, what's up? Like, when we leaving? When are we packing up? We can go. We can even go back and live with daddy. And she says, just go upstairs. I never let her touch me again. She betrayed me in the worst way. I no longer trusted her. And so I became, I guess, somewhat disrespectful. I had no more honor for her. I remember one day after having my son, My stepfather was still working in the school system, but by now he had been demoted because he was stealing things from the school. He had been demoted because he was unlocking doors, classrooms, and allowing basketball players to go in there and have sex with their girlfriends, and so he could watch them. One day, we get a knock at the door. The police knocks at the door, and he says, "Is here?" That's all I needed to hear. I said, "Come on to the door, because your husband done molested somebody's child, and that going to jail today." It was all over the news, daily news, everything. My mother had a daycare, a thriving daycare. She lost her business. She lost everything. He had the little boy at the school that he had been demoted to, and the little boy reported it while I'm at school. And she has my first son. My mother would call me every morning at 6 o'clock, and she would curse me. "I don't know why you at college. You are no good mother. You are nothing. You never gonna be nothing. Why are you at school?" She would just go on, and this, it happened so much that I would be crying on the phone, and they could hear, my roommates could hear, my dorm mates could hear my mother screaming at me through the phone. And so after a while, they recognized who was calling, and so they would come to the door and they said, "What do you want to do? You want us to answer? You gonna take the call, or you're not gonna take the call?" I said, I'm not gonna take the call." They said, "Don't worry about it. I got you, because I already heard your mother. You don't worry. We got you, girl." So finally, she convinces me to come home because I'm a no good mother. And so I come home and I'm writing this poetry. I'm writing, and my mother takes my son and throws him on the bed, and she picks up my poetry and she begins ripping it to shreds. She just takes the notebook and she throws it on the ground and she's ripping. "You're never going to be nothing. You're not anything." And so what I recognize is that my mother was very jealous of me. 21 years later, after getting out of domestic violence, relationship, marriage, I went back to college. I got a bachelor's degree, and then I got a master's degree. I got an honorary doctorate. I lobbied with Maxine Waters and Joe Biden, Lynn Rosenthal. They invited me to the Capitol to tell my story before Congress people there. As parents, it is our responsibility to protect our children at all costs. In my closing, as I've raised my children the best that I could, and I fled a domestic violence marriage. I did not want my children to see their mother murdered. And we were on our way to see my mother. And my oldest son has always been a defender of us. He said, "You don't have to keep torturing yourself by going to visit her, by being subject to her meanness." And so I turned my car around and I drove back up the road. Sometimes I hurt my own self. Sometimes I wasn't always careful and loving to myself. But I've matured and I've healed and I've evolved, and I'm doing my best every day to show up as my best self. And I'm thankful. I'm very, very, very thankful for my life now. I've been a Haiti missionary. I've traveled to Germany, and I'm writing books and traveling and thanking God for another opportunity to live on the other side of pain. I never thought that I would even live to be 50 years old. And here I am on the other side. So I'm very, very thankful. It's time for something new.